Hello there and good morning. It is 7 a.m. Now, Rishi Sunak knew the going was going to be tough, but even so, he's run into choppy water very quickly. The Home Secretary Suella Braverman is accused of a serious security breach. She's also in charge of the immigration and asylum system, which is under severe strain. We'll be reporting live from Dover during the programme and speak to the Conservative MP Roger Gale, whose constituency includes the Manston Immigration Centre, now packed to double its capacity. Plus, we'll find out if Lula Da Silva's victory in the elections in Brazil could help save the Amazon rainforest. It is Monday, the 31st of October. A stunning comeback. Lula Da Silva is Brazil's president again, beating Jair Bolsonaro in a knife-edge vote and saying he wants to preserve the Amazon rainforest. Criticism grows over conditions at a centre for migrants in Kent, which is now at double its capacity, as charities call for a kind and effective system for those seeking asylum in the UK. Question marks over safety checks as the death toll from a bridge collapse in India climbs to at least 132. South Korea's Prime Minister promises a thorough probe into the Halloween crush that killed more than 150 people in the capital and left a nation in mourning. An exclusive poll for Sky News shows that public support for sanctions against Russia could erode if the cost of living crisis worsens.
Ukraine sees the UK as its most important friend, its most important ally, and there will be concerns that this relationship could change.
And also this morning.
Si dañamos una parte de ella, pierde el balance, creándose así fenómenos como los que se viven actualmente.
We'll speak to a member of the Koji indigenous people of Colombia who are taking part in the world's first environmental project to try and restore their damaged land. And reaching new heights, we'll speak to an army veteran, Andy Reid, who's become the first triple amputee to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Hello and thanks for being with us. Brazil has a new president in a knife-edge vote which seals a remarkable comeback. Lula Da Silva beat his right-wing rival, the incumbent Jair Bolsonaro, by the slimmest of margins. In his victory speech, he said Brazil and the planet need a living Amazon rainforest. He's promised to protect it and the people who live there from loggers, miners and the farmers who are tearing it down. Now, Lula is the former president who spent almost 2 years in prison on corruption charges before his conviction was annulled.
During all my life, I always said that God was really generous with me, so I could reach where I am. Above all, at this moment, when we are not only facing an adversary, we didn't face a candidate. We faced the machinery of the Brazilian state put at service of a candidate to avoid us winning the elections. Thanks to the Brazilian people, that I should be grateful with my heart, to the people who voted for me, and to the people who voted for my adversary.
Well, a look at the results shows just how close it was. Lula won 50.9% of all valid votes cast, while Bolsonaro won 49.1%. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, reports from Sao Paulo. And a warning, his report includes some flashing images.
They all knew this election was tight. They all knew that a Lula win would change the political direction of Brazil. A second round, a second chance, but the tension was palpable. Thousands of Lula supporters gathered in Sao Paulo's Paulista Avenue. The results like a drip feed of hope. Behind at first, Lula's vote started to grow, every gain greeted with rapture. It was simple. Could he do it? But it was neck and neck to the end, and then it was done. Lula was president. Cue mayhem.
Today I'm a doctor. It's because of Lula. If today I have this, it's because of Lula. Everything is because of him. My family was very poor, and And today, I'm living in Sao Paulo and working with the job I love.
Within minutes, people began flooding the streets, heading for the celebration. Cars hooting horns. A complete explosion of relief and happiness. The party was now fully underway.
Well, I think actually it was incredibly close, of course. And I think quite a lot of the Lula supporters can't really believe their man has come through. It really has crowned a remarkable comeback for a former president. Went to prison, got out, and is now back. How Jair Bolsonaro is going to take this, of course, we just don't know.
News spread that Lula was going to appear after meeting his campaign and legal teams and taking calls from world leaders. His supporters would have waited any length of time. This was the impossible dream come true.
I think the world needs Lula. He's not the president of Brazil. He's a politician that the world needs, so it's beautiful.
In vast numbers, they filled Paulista as far as the eye could see. It was impossible to guess how many people were here. It was almost impossible to move. They sang the Lula campaign songs and waited, and then he was there, and they exploded once again. This has been a remarkable two-round election, which has revealed the deep divisions in Brazil. But this was a night of celebration for Lula Da Silva and his people. He's promised to reunite his country. It's going to be hard. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Sao Paulo.
Now, reaction to Lula's win has come from across South America. The Mexican President, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, tweeted, "Lula won. Blessed people of Brazil. There will be equality and humanism." Argentina's President Alberto Fernandez said, "Congratulations, Lula. Your victory opens a new time for the history of Latin America, a time of hope and future that begins today." Went on to say, "Here you have a partner to work with and dream big about the good life of our peoples." While the Colombian President Gustavo Petro simply tweeted, "Viva Lula." Well, Stuart Ramsey has the latest now from Sao Paulo, where Lula's supporters have been celebrating.
Well, this was absolutely nail-biting stuff for the Lula supporters. I mean, they were out for hours. And the votes were taking really quite a long time to come in. And it's an electronic voting system, so it is quick. But it was towards the end agony for the huge numbers of Lula people that had come out onto the streets, and they've been flooding in here as well. It's difficult to get an idea of how many there are, but it's a huge number. Every time we start to film, they start shouting and screaming, which you would expect. I think the thing to remember is, A, it is a remarkable comeback for Lula, but it was a really, really close election, and that means the country remains incredibly divided. You know, there's just points in this. I'm not sure of the final figure of number of votes that Lula won by, maybe over 1 million, but the point of the matter, it's still incredibly close in a country this size. And the two sides really are so far apart and actually hate each other. It's difficult to see how Lula is going to be able to get the country back together. But he's going to have to start soon, I suppose. It's going to be some difficult days ahead, I think.
All right, I'm pleased to say we're joined now by the Minister for Food, Mark Spencer. Mark, good morning to you. Thanks very much for coming. Let's just pick up on what we've seen there in Brazil. I mean, obviously, you are in the Environment Department, so you must be delighted that a man who's come in Brazil says he's going to protect the Amazon rainforest.
Yeah, I think that's huge progress, isn't it? And I think it's great news to see democracy happening all around the world.
Yeah, and it's a huge comeback for a man as well, a leftist, though, I suppose.
Well, but, you know, I think the environment is a big issue and Brazil is going to be a big player in that. And I think this is good news for Brazil. It's good news for the world.
OK, let's move on to some domestic issues, and we've got to talk about what's happening down in Kent at the moment, Mark. I mean, you've got an immigration centre there that's housing 4,000 people, capacity for 1,600. What's going on down there?
I mean, there are huge challenges here. You know, I think clearly we've got to break the model that is bringing destitute people across the channel. There are some very bad people who are putting innocent people's lives at risk. We have to break that model. Of course, when they get here, we've got to try and find a way of dealing with them compassionately and looking after them and processing them as quickly as possible. And there are competing ambitions to try and get people processed, but also to look after them and keep them safe.
But we're not keeping them safe, are we? Because they're coming under attack here in this centre. And not only that, the centre's got diphtheria and MRSA.
Yeah, so we're working very hard to try and resolve those challenges. There is a scheme that pushes people out into local authorities to support them in hotels, which we're working towards working with local authorities. But as you say, there are huge challenges. But the answer to this is to break the model that is delivering these people to our doors, to our shores, and that's what we're working very hard to try and do.
We'll come and see how you're breaking that model. But you say you're going to move them out into hotels. That's exact opposite of what the current Home Secretary.
No, so we're working with local authorities to house them. Sorry, so basically we're working with the local authorities to house them locally. There's a scheme. I think it's £20 million we've invested in that scheme to support people. But the answer is, of course, to process them quickly where they are.
So why did the Home Secretary then stop people moving out into hotels during her first tenure before she stepped away again? She had put the block on hotel rooms being used. Why was that? Because
she wants to process them quickly. You know, we've got to try and make sure that those who are genuine asylum seekers, and there are safe routes, of course, to get here via a safe system, she wants to process them very quickly and work out who we need to help protect and who we need to return.
But you can't process them if they're in these squalid conditions, can you? Because it's not getting anywhere. There's a huge logjam there, isn't there?
So there are a lot of people coming, and we need to break that model. We need to make sure that we stop these people coming across the channel, and that's what we're working to do.
It's been described as awful, inhumane. I mean, you can't be proud.
Well, we clearly have an obligation to look after these people and to support them and to keep them safe. And there are huge challenges. I acknowledge that. We've got to try and deal with these people compassionately and quickly.
I'm glad you've acknowledged that, because looking at your record voting on immigration, it's quite a hard line, Mark. Would you say that's a fair way of describing it?
So I think we've got to make sure we control our own borders. That's what people voted for. We want to make sure that the people who are coming are genuine refugees. And we've actually got a really good track record, you know, looking at all the people we've taken from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Hong Kong. The UK has a very proud record of taking people from other countries who are in desperate situations. That will continue.
Oh, absolutely.
But we need to make sure that we're getting the right people.
We should be pleased with that, but I'm saying specifically on voting to stop people who've been here for 6 months finding work if their processes haven't been put through yet. There's been some votes, some decisions made that have made it very difficult for people who come to this country. And I put it to you now that system is completely failed. That idea of lacking in compassion for some of these people who are coming here has broken down, because we had 38,000 come in the last year.
As I say, we've got a huge track record of taking people from other parts of the world. You know, I mean, just look at the Ukraine, the amount of people we've taken from Ukraine, and we should be very proud of that record. But those who are coming, we need to process as quickly as possible to work out who is a genuine asylum seeker and who could be returned to a safe country that they came from.
What about building new areas to hold them, new centres?
Well, I mean, these things are all under review constantly, of course, but it's a huge challenge, and that's what we're seeking to do, to solve that challenge as quickly as possible.
I mean, you've called it a huge challenge many times. Your only solution is to tackle the business model?
Well, that's part of the solution. Of course, the other solution is the Rwanda option, to send people to a safe country like Rwanda. Well, we're still working our way through that, and there are a number of legal challenges to that. But ultimately, you've got to get to these very bad people who are putting lives in danger by putting them on an unseaworthy craft on the other side of the channel and sending them across. People, are putting their lives in danger. We have to break that model. We have an obligation to try and stop that from happening.
Isn't the fact the case that after years of aggressive rhetoric towards migration and migrants, we haven't got to a system that's fit for purpose at this stage. And now we're seeing thousands of people coming across. We're seeing tensions in local towns. I mean, there was a firebombing at one of the centres yesterday, Mark.
Yeah, and that is currently under investigation, so I don't want to say too much about that, but we've been able to move some people away from that incident in Dover, but that's an ongoing investigation.
But do you accept that some of the rhetoric around the way that we treat migrants coming to this country has not been helpful and has led to some of those increased tensions?
No, I mean, clearly, as I keep saying, that it is a huge challenge that these people are wanting to come across the channel to the United Kingdom. It is the bad people in this are the people who are exploiting those individuals. They are taking their life savings, they are putting them on an unseaworthy vessel and putting their lives in danger. We have an obligation to try and stop that from happening and stop these people from drowning in the channel.
Is Suella Braverman the right Home Secretary to deal with this?
Yeah, and the Prime Minister's reappointed her. She put her hands up and said that she made a mistake. I think we need to give her the space to get on and do it.
I mean, it was a mistake. It wasn't an honest mistake, there was it, in some of the reporting.
Well, I think, often you have politicians on here and you accuse them of never apologising and never saying sorry. She made a mistake. She put her hands up and said, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake. The Prime Minister has reappointed her. I think she needs to concentrate now on getting on with her job. She's recruiting police officers, driving down crime, concentrating on burglaries and dealing with this challenge of migrants crossing the channel.
I mean, can she concentrate on it with all of these noises?
Yeah,
this is not just the one mistake. There's reporting there have been many mistakes, and there's also reporting that those within her department are not happy with her having come back.
She's completely focused on the job. We need to let her get on and do it.
She's got your full backing as well.
Of course.
Let's talk about what happened with the former Prime Minister, former Foreign Secretary. Liz Truss's phone was hacked. It's been reported in the newspapers recently. I mean, you're in government. Do you use your government phone for any personal business?
I do not, no. But, I mean, so you do get quite a lot of briefing from the security services on what to do and what not to do. It's quite important to get that right. I don't want to comment too much on it because, of course, what I don't want to do is tell the world exactly what that briefing says. But you do get a lot of support when you become a government minister on what is appropriate and inappropriate as a government minister.
So perhaps she wasn't listening to the briefing then if she was using it?
Well, I think, as she said, she made a mistake, but...
Well, Liz Truss made a mistake as well by using...
No, sorry, I thought you were talking about the Home Secretary.
No,
the former Prime Minister clearly was hacked, so that is the first thing you do, is say, oh, my goodness, I've been hacked, help, and the security service will help you with that challenge. Now, of course, you don't always know, which is why you've got to be super careful.
I think the concern was that she was perhaps talking on her personal phone, and there may be some stuff in there that leaves her open to be compromised.
Well, we all talk on personal phones, don't we? I ring my wife. Maybe there's some little man in China listening to the conversations between me and my wife. But, you've just got to be careful about what information you use on which phone, and you get a lot of help and support from the security services on that.
And do you think there's time for some more help and support for some of these ministers?
Well,
being as careful with security as they perhaps
It is ongoing. I mean, we need to recognise, there are states out there that want to do us harm, and Russia's being very aggressive in Ukraine. There are lots of people that want to do this country harm, which is why we have to be careful.
Let me ask you a little bit about COP27. The Prime Minister said that he wasn't going to go. He had to focus on domestic commitments. It's now being reported that he may well go. What's changed?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has a huge inbox. He's come into office. He's got an inbox which is full to the brim. Clearly, he wants to concentrate on the financial statement, and that's what he's doing. But if he's able to get through all of that, COP is very important. It's very important to the government. It's important to our future, and so we'll send out senior ministers. But that's yet to be decided who's going to go.
Would you like to see him go?
Well, if he's got time. Only he will know what he's got in his inbox and in his diary if he has the time. But he'll make that call, and I'm sure it'll be the right one.
It'd be best to have the Prime Minister there on the world stage. It'd be first chance to... Well, it's not just a COP, is it, as well, Mark, is it? He's going to get to meet other world leaders there. It's his first chance. We've got a war in Europe here.
Well, as a former Chancellor, he's met lots of those world leaders in the past. But it is an important topic to the government, and we will send a serious team out there.
Just lastly, before you go, because last time I spoke to you, I did ask you about this, and we didn't get any conclusion on it. Nusrat Ghani, the investigation into what happened with her, it was kicked off into long grass when the Ethics Commissioner resigned. Where are we with that now? So,
the honest truth is, I don't know. I'm waiting for that report to come out. Obviously, we've had quite a lot of turmoil in the system. My understanding is that Lord Geidt was very close to coming forward. I'm absolutely desperate for that report. A few months ago,
you said the same thing to me.
I know. It is very, very, very frustrating for me, to be honest, because obviously I know I'm completely innocent. I just want them to come forward with that report and say, there we go.
So you are expecting it still to come forward?
Well, so no one has told me it isn't, so we shall see.
We'll try and get it cleared up. Mark Spencer, lovely to have you with us. Thanks very much. Thanks this morning. All right, let's take a look at the morning's newspapers now. We'll start with the Daily Mail. That reports on a petrol bomb attack on a facility processing migrants in Dover over questions about whether some sites are safe and sanitary. That's also the lead in The Times, which has the headline, Firebomb Attack on Migrants. Daily Express calls it a horror petrol bomb attack, which ended with the attacker killing himself. The Telegraph reports that the government is planning to house migrants in hotels alongside the public to try and regain control of channel crossings. The Guardian carries a warning from the former head of the British Army of a Wild West-type attitude to national security in government. The Metro also quotes Lord Dannatt, who accuses the Home Secretary of ill discipline and poor judgment. The Eye reports that Rishi Sunak could reverse his decision not to attend the COP27 climate summit in Egypt after some criticism. All right, still to come on the show this morning, over 100 refugee charities have signed an open letter to the Home Secretary calling on her for a kind and effective system for those seeking asylum. I'll be speaking to the Chief Executive of the charity Freedom from Torture, Sonia Skeets. And we'll be joined shortly by the former British diplomat Andrew Levy as the government faces calls to investigate as reports that Liz Truss's phone was hacked by Russia. Now, at least 132 people are now known to have died after a pedestrian bridge collapsed in India. The bridge reopened just days ago after lengthy repair work, and officials say there are concerns over whether adequate safety checks were carried out before people were allowed to use it. Now, the bridge spans the Machu River in Gujarat state. Many more people were injured as they tried to cling on to the bridge as it fell into the water. Ashna Hurdinag reports.
This twisted piece of metal is all that remains of Gujarat's heritage bridge. The railings that lined it now form a ladder for those trying to get out. Most of the 233-metre narrow footbridge is now submerged in the river below after it collapsed, taking dozens of people with it, including children. Buoyancy aids are thrown to people in the murky Machu River. Some use them to paddle back into the centre to search for survivors. All as more ambulances arrive to line the riverbank. The bridge had only reopened a few days ago after being shut for 6 months for renovation work. Now bystanders look on in horror at the frayed remnants. Hundreds used this route every day. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said in a message on social media he is deeply saddened by the tragedy in his home state and has deployed emergency services to the area. This is a major search and rescue operation for them that will continue in the coming days. The injured continue to arrive at the local hospital. Inside, panicked families fill waiting rooms, searching for loved ones. As this tragedy, caused by the city's major landmark, unfolds before their eyes. Ashna Harinag, Sky News.
Well, investigations are continuing into the cause of a fatal crowd surge which left 154 people dead in the South Korean capital, Seoul. Most were young people out to enjoy Halloween celebrations. They became trapped in a narrow alley packed with thousands. Well, let's go now to our Asia correspondent, Helen Ann Smith, who's joining us live. Helen Ann, good to have you with us. So what more do we know about what happened during this incident and how is South Korea responding?
Well, really, as the hours go by, just more and more horrifying details come out from eyewitnesses about just how traumatic, how utterly terrifying it must have been for those young people caught up in that awful, awful crush on Saturday night. Details from one eyewitness talk about how people were just piling like dominoes on top of each other. It was a very narrow, almost slightly sloped alleyway that young people found themselves in. There were details about people being pulled out, bleeding from their mouths and their ears, how there was rows of people trying to administer CPR, untrained members of the public trying to administer CPR because there just weren't enough medical staff to deal with just how many injured and dying people there were. It sounds truly, truly horrific. South Korea really now waking up to a week of mourning, a real sense of shock, and I think a kind of creeping sense of incredulity as well about how this could have been allowed to happen. President Yoon of South Korea, he made another appearance in central Seoul today at a memorial that has sprung up in the centre there. A lot of the shops and bars and nightclubs around that district where this tragedy happened remain closed today. And there's been some really awful, grim detail as well. Things like the Seoul city authorities saying that they've asked the crematoriums in the city to step up the number of bodies that they would typically burn on any one day to try and help support the families and the bereaved through the funeral process. So really, really grim details, and certainly a sense that people are asking how this could possibly be allowed to have happened, because there were 100,000 or so people in that party district on Saturday night, but lots of people are saying there's nothing particularly unexpected about that. This was a district that is always busy, particularly when there are festivals or particular events that people want to celebrate. And then on top of that, this is the first Halloween that young people were able to celebrate since COVID. And South Korea has had some of the strictest and most long-lasting COVID restrictions, the last of which I really only got lifted in May. So a lot of people saying that this should have been predicted. Many eyewitnesses saying there were signs from a number of hours before the crash happened that things were really very, very busy and beginning to feel quite unsafe. And many people saying they saw very few, if no police. Why were there not more crowd control measures, people are asking. So I think there's a sense that there's a potential reckoning still to be had in South Korea this week, very much for mourning, for grieving, for families to identify their missing. But a sense, I think, that anger may well mount over this, and that questions for the authorities about why more was not done earlier to prevent this may well mount.
OK, Helen, for now, thank you. Now, an exclusive poll by Ipsos for Sky News has found that public support for UK sanctions on Russia remains strong, but could erode if the cost of living crisis intensifies. The findings suggest that 70% of people support sanctions on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, similar to the 78% who supported them just after the beginning of the war. But the proportion saying they would support continuing economic sanctions, even if they led to increased energy prices, has fallen significantly over the same period. It's now just 41% compared with 73% back in March. And a third say they would oppose sanctions if it meant energy prices increased further. Of course, since March, energy costs have doubled for the average household. Now, concern about the impact of war on the UK economy is clear. 82% of people say they are very concerned or fairly concerned, and more people say they are worried about the impact on the Ukrainian people than on themselves. Well, let's bring in our international correspondent, John Sparks, who's in Zaporizhzhia for us this morning. John, good morning to you. So, I'm not sure if the people of Ukraine will pick up on that survey, but they'll be, I guess, worried to hear that if the energy crisis continues, the public support in the UK could decrease.
Yeah, good morning, Kamali. I think first thing to say is that the city where we are, Zaporizhzhia, has been hit by a couple of missile strikes this morning. We heard the crump in another part of the city. Other parts of Ukraine have also been hit. Odessa, Kyiv, Kharkiv as well. The Russians going after critical infrastructure. They've been doing this for the last couple of weeks, trying to turn the electricity off, basically, and the heating as well before the cold weather comes in. And I think it is for that reason that I think some people at least will be concerned. I think they frustrated even when they see and read about this poll, Sky's poll. I mean, we are told regularly in the streets, we are thanked because we are from Britain. People are incredibly grateful, incredibly appreciative of the billions of pounds of military aid that Ukraine receives from the UK. For many people, along with the United States, this is the essential relationship for Ukraine. And I think people probably are looking for more support and more assistance, not less, particularly at a time when there is a feeling that the tide is turning in this conflict. The tide is turning against the Russians. If you look at artillery pieces, for example, a really critical part of this war, The Ukrainians didn't have as many as the Russians. Now they do, and they have better equipment, longer range, it's more accurate, and that in large part is because of Western support. So again, people are really, really grateful, and their expectations, if anything, have probably increased. They do hear this argument from people in Britain and elsewhere, people starting to doubt their commitment to Ukraine and its role in fighting the Russians, and they've got a pretty simple argument for that. They say, look, Ukraine is fighting for Britain. We're fighting for the West. We're fighting for democracy. And if we're not doing it, then you may have to do it in the future. That is the argument that they use when they hear these arguments that have been expressed in this poll.
And John, just tell us a little bit, if you can, about what's happening with this grain deal. You know, Russia decided to pull out of it at the end of last week, reporting this morning that Turkey, Ukraine and the rest are going to try and push ahead with it. What's the latest on that situation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what's going on here is that the United Nations, Turkey, the European Union, they spoke up this morning as well. They're basically putting pressure, they're putting maximum pressure on the Russians to get these grain shipments rolling again. I mean, it's a rare example of a wartime success. About 10 million tons of wheat have been shipped through the Black Sea under this initiative to Turkey, where it then gets inspected and then goes on to other parts of the world. What we know, that obviously the Russians pulled out after a series of drone attacks by the Ukrainians on Saturday. The Russians remain in dialogue with the UN over this grain shipment initiative. They're not physically there in Istanbul, where it's all organised, but they're still in dialogue. The UN says it's got a plan for 16 ships to move from today. They're still going to need Russia's say-so to get these ships moving across the Black Sea. But I think they're bringing as much pressure as they can possibly bring against the Russians to try and get these shipments going again.
OK, John Fernandez, our producer, thank you. Now, tomorrow we'll have a special live show from the Imperial War Museum in London, looking back at the war so far. That's Ukraine, a modern war, live on Sky News from 7:30 p.m. tomorrow. It'll also be available on the Sky News YouTube channel. Well, some of your morning's other news now, when police are investigating a fatal shooting in South London that left 2 men dead. Officers were called to Railton Road in Lambeth just before 8 last night after reports of gunfire. Despite the efforts of the emergency crews, both men died at the scene. The Metropolitan Police say that no arrests have been made. Elon Musk has deleted a tweet with an unfounded theory about the attack on the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. The new owner of Twitter removed the tweet after he was criticised by other users for sharing a link to a rumour about the attack. It's added to concern that following his takeover, the platform would no longer seek to limit misinformation and hate speech. Now, players from Arsenal have shown their support for their teammate Pablo Mari as he recovers after being stabbed in a supermarket in Italy last week. The 29-year-old defender, who's on loan to AC Monza at the moment, was stabbed in the back during an attack that left 1 person dead. Now, paying tribute, players at the North London club held up a shirt with Mari's name before they went on to beat Forest by 5-0. Now, I'll be speaking in a moment to the MP for North Thanet, that's Roger Gale, and the charity chief executive, Sonia Skeets, about the migrant crisis. Stay with us. Hello and welcome back. Now, the Home Secretary Suella Braverman has been told by more than 100 charities to create safer routes for those seeking asylum in the UK. Now, earlier this morning, I asked the Government Minister, Mark Spencer, why the situation down in Kent was so bad.
There are huge challenges here. You know, I think clearly we've got to break the model that is bringing destitute people across the channel. There are some very bad people who are putting innocent people's lives at risk. We have to break that model. Of course, when they get here, we've got to try and find a way of dealing with them compassionately and looking after them and processing them as quickly as possible. And there are competing ambitions to try and get people processed, but also to look after them and keep them safe.
Let's bring in our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, who's with us now. Tamara, good morning to you. So, look, he said that there are competing ideas of how to do this, but basically admitting that there's a big problem and they don't know how to solve it yet.
And it's a problem that's on the desk of the Home Secretary, who's already had a pretty difficult time. In Manston, migrant processing centre, we now learn that there are 4,000 people in a facility that's supposed to house 1,600. And as a result of this firebombing in Dover last night, even more people are going to be sent there. He pretty much admitted that the Home Secretary had not chosen to allow people who should not be there ideally for more than 24 hours to go to hotels. He said that was because she wanted them to be processed quickly. Clearly that is not happening. We've had even the former head of the probation service saying that they're being housed in inhumane conditions. So plenty of MPs want to see the Home Secretary do more of the compassion and less of the trying to get them processed quickly, which isn't seemingly happening. We learnt last week MPs were told that of those Channel migrants who came over in the whole year of 2021, only 4% have had their claims processed. Clearly, there's a massive backlog in the asylum system, and the suggestion is that this Home Secretary and perhaps her predecessors have not got a grip on it. We already know that she's under fire over the reasons that she resigned from Liz Truss's government, namely a security breach, which has not been fully explained yet, and I expect Labour will seek answers on that today. But she's in the middle now of a crisis over migrant processing on the South Coast. And as the Minister was saying there are very few easy answers, but many MPs wonder if Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has been returned to her position for political reasons, having supported Rishi Sunak, and want to see her now try to get a grip of this situation.
OK, Tamara, for now, thank you for that. All right, let's bring in the MP for North Lanark, that's Roger Gale, who visited the immigration centre in Manston yesterday and joins us now live. Roger Gale, good morning to you. Thanks for being with us. When you went to Manston, what was the situation like?
It's much worse than it was when I visited earlier last Thursday, when there were 2,500 people there. Tamara wasn't quite right in what she said. The increase is because of the transfers from Dover, partly as a result of the firebombing yesterday. So there are now 4,000 people in a facility that was designed to hold 1,500. And that is wholly unacceptable. The staff are doing a fantastic job. The Home Office staff, the civilian staff, the catering staff, the medics are all showing compassion and doing the best they can under very difficult circumstances. But these circumstances, I believe now, were a problem made in the Home Office.
Right, a problem made in the Home Office. We'll come on to some of that in a moment, Mr Gale. But just tell us, you've applied for an urgent question. Why is that?
Well, because I think this is something that has to be aired on the floor of the House. The Home Office Minister of State, Robert Jenrick, took the trouble to come and spend 3 hours with me, with Home Office staff, going around the facility yesterday. I'd been before, of course. I'm delighted that Robert did take the trouble to come, because I think he understands now what really the problem is. And I got the impression that he is determined to go away and deal at least with the immediate problem, because there are two issues. There is, of course, the longer-term problem of, and very real issue, of cross-channel migrants, which also has to be addressed in a grown-up fashion, not by dog whistle politics.
Oh, and take that message back to his boss in the Home Office, do you think?
I'm absolutely certain that Robert Jenrick will have spoken to the Home Secretary last night.
And what do you think he will have said to her? How will he have advised her that she should proceed here? Because you will have seen all the reporting this weekend that decisions have been taken concerning Manston that may well have exacerbated the situation we find ourselves in now.
Without breaking confidences, I think that Robert will be probably going back and saying not to book hotel accommodation as a matter of policy. Whether that policy was instigated by the previous Home Secretary or this one, I'm not clear. But it clearly was a matter of Home Office policy. I think Robert will be saying that was a mistake. We've now got to get people out of Manston, so that the job that it was doing very efficiently indeed of processing and moving people on can be done again. Up until 3 or 4 weeks, about 5 weeks ago, actually, probably, the system was working as it was intended to, very well indeed. It's now broken and it's got to be mended fast.
And Suella Braverman has been brought back in, Sir Roger. I mean, is she the right person to handle this now?
I'm not seeking to point fingers at the moment, but I do believe that whoever is responsible, and that is either the previous Home Secretary or this one, has to be held to account, because a bad decision was taken and it's led to what I would regard as a breach of humane conditions.
And it may end up actually in the courts as well, if that decision is found to have been taken, that people have been held at Manston past the 30 days that they're meant to be there.
Well, that is a matter for the courts and not for me. I am concerned, obviously, with the people that I represent locally, who are in turn concerned about what's happening at Manston. But I'm also concerned for the staff who are trying to do a good job under impossible circumstances, and for the human beings, including women and children. I saw a kid there yesterday who was younger than my youngest granddaughter, who crossed the channel in a rubber dinghy. It is appalling what is happening at that level. The trafficking is appalling, and that has got to be dealt with as well. But that's got to be done on a pan-European basis and in bilateral cooperation with the French. That's the only way we're going to solve it, not by, as I said, dog whistle, knee-jerk policies that will not work.
What's the immediate solution to this, in your opinion, Sir Roger, then? Is it to build more capacity to try and house people who are here?
The immediate solution is to either build capacity or, more probably, to acquire capacity in the form of former student accommodation, which is available, former MOD accommodation, which is available, and to use that, having converted it properly for the purpose. Manston has not been converted for that purpose. I was given a clear undertaking by the Minister and by the previous Home Secretary that this facility will be turning people around, 1,500 people a day, in 24 to 48 hours. That held until about 5 weeks ago, but as a result of Home Office policy, that is now broken. We've got to get back to using Manston as it was intended to be used for the job that it was intended to do.
I mean, do you instantly run up against the situation here, Sir Roger, that if you build more capacity, you then have the problem as to where that capacity actually is, and people, many people, don't want there to be reception centres, detention centres, whatever you want to call them eventually, in their backyards?
Yes, there is a huge amount of NIMBYism about this, but look, I tried to take a responsible attitude. I knew that my constituents would be resistant to the idea of Manston Barracks being used for this purpose, but I recognised the necessity because the docks at Dover were being overwhelmed. We needed to move people on to somewhere where they could be processed humanely and decently and properly. And under the circumstances, that seemed to me to be reasonable. I visited the facility when it was being built with the then Minister, Tom Percival. Tom and I visited it again in July. It was running extremely well. There were no problems. There weren't people wandering around the streets, as being suggested. The medical care was good. That is breaking down as a result of new Home Office policy, and that is not acceptable.
I mean, you've blamed the Home Office policy quite a few times during our discussion, Sir Roger. What gives you confidence, then, that this Home Secretary said it was her dream to send people to Rwanda previously, who, it's reported, stopped some of these migrants who are in this detention centre being moved into hotels? What gives you any confidence that she will be the right person to solve it?
I'm confident that, having visited the facility himself and seen for himself yesterday, the Minister of State, Robert Jenrick, will take the right message back to the Home Office and say, this has got to be sorted. And in fact, I know that Robert has already sought to commission some hotel space, and that some people, not a lot, but some people will be moving out today. We've got to accelerate that process so that Manston can get back to doing the job that it was doing very well.
OK, Sir Roger Gale, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you. Now, Freedom from Torture is one of a number of charities that's written to the Home Secretary over the refugee backlog and a lack of safe routes for people to come to this country. The organisation's chief executive, Sonia Skeets, joins us now. Sonia Skeets, good morning to you. Thanks for being with us. Your reaction, first of all, to what we're seeing down in Kent right now?
Well, first of all, I would really want to remind viewers that the people we are talking about in that facility are, for the most part, people who are fleeing problems in the world like torture, people coming from countries like Afghanistan and Iran, standing up for rights that we hold so dear here in Britain. These are people coming here for our safety, who need to be treated in a humane way. So I concur completely with our previous guest, Sir Roger Gale, that this is an entirely unacceptable situation. It's a problem of the government's own making, and it needs to be sorted out immediately.
Sorted out immediately. What does that look like, Ms. Skeets?
Our ministers need to get their priorities straight. We put ministers into office to oversee the administration of our systems, including the asylum system. And we have had 2 consecutive Home Secretaries who have been asleep at the wheel in relation to the functioning of our asylum system, pursuing instead cruel and unworkable policies designed to secure headlines like the immoral Cash for Humans scheme with Rwanda. They need to abandon that cruel plan immediately and get back to work sorting out a backlog which now has more than 100,000 people in it who are languishing at incredible expense to taxpayers and terrible consequences for their mental health in hotels. That is what we're calling on ministers to do.
I mean, we'll leave the Rwanda policy to the side for one moment because obviously that is going through the courts now. But this idea of making it a difficult place to arrive into was much of the reason as to why the Conservative Party was elected in 2019. It was part of the idea of making a hostile environment for people coming here. So this is what's been voted for by some.
Absolutely not. The Conservative Party did not go to the last election on a mandate, a manifesto promise to start shipping asylum seekers, people fleeing torture, off to far-flung corners of the world in exchange for cash. The Conservative Party promised to ensure that this country would continue offering asylum to people who require it, including people like those who we help at Freedom from Torture, people fleeing torture. And instead what's happened is a creeping gist towards extremism in our politics designed to create headlines to distract the country from the scandal of millions of people who cannot afford to feed their children and to keep their homes warm in the winter. This is a political strategy and it is having terrible consequences for some of the most vulnerable people of the world, some of whom are reaching our shores seeking safety in Britain, and we should be providing it.
And how do we provide some of that safety? Is the answer to build some more capacity?
I mean, for a start, I just want to point out that the Home Secretary has been saying that part of the solution is to be creating safe pathways. It's an audacious thing for this Home Secretary to be saying, because this government has effectively been dismantling those pathways over the last few years, including schemes like the Dub scheme, which was a really effective way of reuniting people who were in France, for example, with family members here in Britain. So we need safe pathways, more of them urgently. We need our ministers to be turning their attention to the actual running of our asylum system, sorting out the backlog, moving people through the system. We know that 85% of those who are crossing the channel roughly are securing refugee status if their claims get looked at. These are people with genuine protection claims. And if we can process them quickly, they will then be moving into mainstream accommodation and we will be reducing bills for taxpayers being amassed because of this hotel situation, which is just unsustainable for everybody.
And finally, how much confidence do you have in the Home Secretary being the right person to follow that through?
Zero confidence. I mean, she is a Home Secretary who is not even trusted by our security services, and she is cruel. We can't have a Home Secretary who is intent on dreaming of sending torture survivors to Rwanda instead of keeping our country safe and ensuring that we are offering protection to the small numbers of people who come here seeking safety here in Britain. Low confidence indeed. And of course, that's not a minority view. The confidence in her is sapping from across the political spectrum at the moment, and rightly so.
OK, Sonia Skeets, Chief Exec of Freedom from Torture. I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you for being with us. Now, it's been reported this weekend that when she was Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss's phone was hacked. The suspects are Russian spies. Well, let's bring in Andrew Levy, a former British diplomat, for some more on this. Mr. Levy, good morning to you. Thanks for being with us. I mean, what's happened with the former Foreign Secretary, the former Prime Minister's phone, has been described as ill-disciplined by General Lord Richard Dannett. Do you agree with that?
Well, the story that the Mail on Sunday printed said that she had been using her personal phone and that top secret information had been compromised. Top secret means information that could cause widespread loss of life or severe damage to the national security of the UK or friendly countries. So given that the government hasn't denied the story and Liz Truss hasn't denied it either, I think it is a very, very serious matter.
And what needs to happen now then with this? There needs to be a full investigation into exactly what took place.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it feels like there needs to be a cross-party parliamentary investigation, which may need to be partially held in secret due to the material that's been compromised. Of course, it's not for me to say, but that would be my opinion, yes.
I mean, I spoke to Mark Spencer, the government minister, earlier, and he said that there are protocols in place, there are sort of lessons that are given to ministers about how to keep their data safe. Do you think that those lessons need to be renewed? Do you think that ministers need to get told again how to not be compromised by using their phones for anything that could be hacked?
I certainly, and I believe that the protocols are there. My experience always was that they were very clear. But we've had two cases come to light. One is this, in the case of Liz Truss. The other is the Home Secretary using her personal phone in a way that looks entirely inappropriate. And so it seems like the protocols aren't working in practice, and that's a very serious matter for us all, not least, by the way, because the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary are right at the core of UK's national security. They're in charge of the intelligence agencies, the Home Secretary, obviously, MI5, the Foreign Secretary, MI6 and GCHQ. This couldn't really be more serious. So the reinforcement, certainly, investigation, I think, as well. The government perhaps won't like that, but in the public interest, I would have thought that is going to happen at some point.
Yeah, and I guess that once this happens, it's very much the case that the genie's out of the bottle. I mean, how do you try kind of recover from the situation like this when sensitive material is being used so loosely?
At the moment, because we're basing this on a Mail on Sunday story and the fact that the government hasn't denied it, and Mark Spencer evidently didn't deny it this morning, we have a presumption that it happened, but of course we don't know the detail. And the security agencies will be going through, and will have been for months already, a very detailed threat assessment and damage assessment. And in the light of that, they will be making recommendations about what to do. And of course, I don't know the details of that. None of us do.
I mean, do you expect that there will be a statement at some point very soon from the Home Secretary just laying out exactly what has taken place here and trying to give some detail as to what went on?
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? And I think Yvette Cooper asked for something like that. This is, in one way, it shouldn't be highly political, should it? It should be a matter that concerns us all, and it's all our national security. In another way, it does seem to be highly political. There's also seems to be some infighting going on between the previous prime ministers, Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, and the current prime minister. And by the way, the Russians love to exploit this kind of thing. They like to weaken governments that aren't friendly to them. The UK isn't friendly to Russia, certainly, in the current circumstances. And they may well be manipulating this information as well. So we have to be a little bit cautious about what we think is going on. But it would be extraordinary if the government at a very senior level didn't present information to Parliament and to maybe a committee of Privy Councillors in private as well.
OK, Andrew Lee, we do appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for being with us.